Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. It was probably also because of such ordinariness that Lin Li did not pay him much attention right from the beginning. But now, it was definitely different. How could Lin Li not figure out the truth behind this middle-aged mage when Lin Li knew that he was the key role of the plan? Who knew that this glance would immediately cause Lin Li to be rather shocked? This middle-aged man was indeed somewhat weird. He had actually concealed his power like Lin Li. Furthermore, his method of concealing his power was rather brilliant. Even with Lin Li's powerful mental strength, he had thought that he was genuinely a level 10 mage at the beginning. If it was any other person, they would not know how this level 10 mage had transformed and changed into a genuine archmage even when they were dead. Luckily, Lin Li had asked Reggie. "Okay, it's fine now. Leave first." Lin Li waved his hand, signaling to Reggie that he could leave. But before he left, Lin Li again reminded, "If you don't want to stir trouble, it's best that you pretend that nothing happened." Reggie nodded. "Okay, I know what to do." After seeing Reggie leave, Lin Li again glanced at that middle-aged mage from afar. Lin Li had to admit that this middle-aged mage had concealed his power ingeniously. Even with his immense mental strength, Lin Li had to probe very cautiously before he could determine his true strength. If Lin Li was not mistaken, this middle-aged mage's strength was similar to that of Amanda's, or it might be even more powerful. This also meant that he was at least an archmage at the peak of level 17. Even Lin Li could not help but feel afraid when he thought about it. A level 17 archmage that had sedulously disguised himself was too dangerous. When he tore off his disguise and suddenly released a lethal strike, even a legendary mage would be shocked and covered with cold sweat. Luckily, Lin Li discovered him early. Things were much easier now. The enemy's disguise had been torn apart, and his own disguise was still perfect. As long as Lin Li was willing, he could take him out anytime. A high-ranking vampire, an ex-lich, and a level 18 archmage. When these three come together, even a mutant crimson python could be killed. What more an archmage that was merely at the peak of level 17? Of course, Lin Li was in no hurry to make his move. As long as he continued disguising himself, he would have a chance at any given time or location. There was no need to hurry. Even if he really wanted to take out this middle-aged mage, he would have to wait till he reached his destination tomorrow. However, he really wanted to know what were those 6 strange magical crystals actually used for. These 6 magical crystals are troublesome. Just a single mistake carries the danger of mana loss. I need to think of a way. While Lin Li was rubbing his nose and thinking of a solution, an intense magical wave was suddenly released from his pocket. "It's Gavin's gang." Lin Li hurriedly took out a crystal ball the size of a fist. The crystal ball was made as a copy, based on the one at the Emerald Towers Hall. It could also be linked to a fixed warlock's eyes, it was just that it could not be sustained for long. Usually, 3 minutes was the limit. When it went past 3 minutes, the crystal ball would no longer be able to tolerate the surge of mana, and would self-destruct. After considering that the trip to the Blackstone Mountains this time would be dangerous, Lin Li took 2 more at the same time, one for Gavin and one for himself. In this way, both parties would be able to communicate momentarily with each other if they were to encounter danger. "Gavin, what happened?" "It's like this, President Felix." Following this familiar voice, Gavin's face that grew a large beard also appeared in the crystal ball. Probably due to enduring the hardships of an arduous journey, the bearded Gavin looked rather untidy. His hair and beard were in a mess, making him look more like an adventurer than a mage. Thankfully, Gavin's complexion was rather calm. It did not seem like he had encountered any danger. "Just now, a bandit called Weather came looking for me. He said he had something very important that he must tell you." "Weather?" Lin Li was stunned immediately. He did remember Weather. Back then, at Sire Town's ruins, the one that almost got crippled by his cloud storm was precisely Weather. But, wasn't this guy always at Jason's side? Why would he suddenly look for Lin Li? "Weather, tell President Felix yourself, but you'd better hurry, this crystal ball can only sustain the connection for another 2 minutes. Gavin's voice had just fallen, and he was already pushed to the side. In his place appeared a face that was incomparably wretched. Mage Felix, it's like this. Jason asked me to tell you that you must be careful of that level 10 mage, called Adara. He is now part of the advance party, but he is probably using another name. According to Jason, this guy is actually a level 17 archmage. He is shouldering a very important mission as he follows you to the Scar of Death this time. After he has completed his mission, he will definitely take action against you. Okay, understood. Lin Li nodded his head, he did not look surprised. For him, this was just verification of what he had already guessed. Weather, thank you for telling me all of this. When you return, help me thank Jason for his trouble as well. When I return to Duland, I will definitely thank him properly. You're welcome. It's our honor to be of service to you. After chatting with Weather for a bit, Lin Li called Gavin over again. Gavin, I have a map. Hurry and copy it down. After that, follow the marks on the map and hurry to the area near the Scar of Death before night falls today, Lin Li said as he took out the map from his pocket. Through the warlock's eyes that was linked to the crystal ball, he sent over the route on the map. After entering the Scar of Death, I will leave a mark. You just have to follow the mark, and you shouldn't come across any danger. Sure, President Felix. The advance party was moving very quickly. In less than half an hour, they had already reached the border of the forest. Lin Li knew that it was not too far from the Scar of Death. After exiting the forest, there would only be an hour's journey left. After Lin Li had made all of the arrangements, he turned into a level 10 mage and followed Jonathan the entire time. Those that were clueless would mostly think that this young mage was hoping that Jonathan would protect him, but those that understood the exact details about him would understand that Jonathan would not meet with any danger when those two walked together. Honestly speaking, Brother Felix. Sometimes, I really don't understand what you are thinking about. The advance party is so dangerous that others would run immediately, but you actually courageously rushed over. You're still so young, aren't you afraid of dying at all? While walking, the two of them just casually chatted away. Haha, this is the Blackstone Mountains, how would it have any safe place? Is the base safe? There might be a powerful magical beast coming anytime, and those fellas hiding at the base would be out of luck, watch out. Before Lin Li could finish speaking, there was a gust of wind coming from behind. Luckily, Lin Li reacted fast enough. When the sound of the wind had just sounded, Lin Li had already raised his hand and pushed Jonathan forcefully away. After that, he cast Spell of Frost, and a brilliant and transparent ice wall was erected with a boom. Everything had happened too quickly. Even with Lin Li's reaction, he could only release a Spell of Frost. After that, a bright red shadow flashed by. It was like a red thunderbolt as it struck the ice wall. In an instant, a loud boom could be heard. After that, a swish, swish was ringing endlessly in their ears. There were countless cracks on the thick ice wall. They were just like a flower that had bloomed, covering the whole ice wall instantaneously. Frack, it's the red leopard, Lin Li took a look while turning his body to retreat. On the other side of the ice wall, there was a crimson beast that was letting out low and angry roars. The strike that cracked the ice wall just now had caused it to sustain significant damage, and fresh blood was dripping down from the wound on its forehead. Its two eyes revealed a menacing light, and narrowed as the crack in the ice wall grew bigger. After that, there was a loud crashing sound. Ice flakes filled the air, fluttering around. The thick ice wall had been shattered by the red leopard's first strike. This fella is really ferocious. However, this was no longer important for Lin Li. It was because when the ice wall was blocking the red leopard, he had already used the chance to retreat more than 10 meters with Jonathan. Even if the red leopard were to attack again, Lin Li would have sufficient time to react. Fell. Brother Felix. What is this monster? That attack just now had totally scared Jonathan. If it were not because this young mage had pushed him away, his neck would most probably have been broken. It seems like it's the red leopard, a level 17 magical beast, Lin Li managed to find time to answer Jonathan while reciting his incantations silently. At this time, 4 level 15 bandits and 2 warriors were all scouting in the forest. Other than Lin Li's group of 4, there were only Jonathan and Adelo left. Jonathan was only a level 14 warrior, and Adelo was definitely not willing to show his power. In order to block the attacks of the red leopard, Lin Li could only make moves in the dark. Thus, Lin Li prepared a level 15 dark flames. At least on the surface, it was very similar to the level 8 flaming storm. If this Adelo's judgment were to be slightly bad, he might not be able to tell the difference between the two. Of course, this was the last resort. Lin Li would not take this risk until the final juncture. Luckily, those 2 warriors that were originally in front of the force rushed back on time. Currently, they were facing away from Lin Li, and whispered something to Adelo. The 2 warriors then took out their weapons and charged ahead toward the red leopard that was leaping forward through the shattered ice after Adelo shook his head. Everything happened inconspicuously to the side. The 2 warriors had proper limits for their actions, they did not attract any attention from others. Even if somebody had seen it, they would most likely think that this was just basic concern shown between companions. However, Lin Li knew that it was not the case. It was because Lin Li had already cast Whisperwind spell when the 2 warriors had returned, and the conversation between the 3 of them was heard clearly by Lin Li. Lin Li remembered that what those 2 warriors asked was, "Master Adelo, are you alright?" In response, Adelo shook his head, and said, "I'm fine. The 2 of you, hurry and slay this red leopard. It most likely came from the Scar of Death." Seems like this Adelo knows quite a lot. Lin Li slowly dissipated the mana he had gathered. He became even more curious about the status of that Adelo. There was at least one thing that Lin Li could confirm, it was that this Adelo did not have the same status as Amenda's. He was very likely a core member of the Maltha family, the type that could be involved in the deepest secrets. Lin Li even felt that this Adelo was very likely related to the legendary mage of the Maltha family. If that was the case, then it would be very interesting to enter the Scar of Death this time. At the same time, when Lin Li was dissipating his mana, one of the warriors wielding a machete charged towards the red leopard with a raging combat energy. Amidst the low and furious roars, glints of the blade flashed by. In an instant, both the man and beast were clashing with each other. He really is a level 17 warrior. Once he saw that raging combat energy, Lin Li knew that he'd made the right guess. As expected, these 2 warriors that seemed like they did not know each other were Adelo's true bodyguards. Reggie's group of 4 might be very famous amongst the adventurers, but their strength was only at level 15. Furthermore, they were bandits that were not good at face-to-face combat. Relying on them to barge into the Scar of Death was not practical. It was these 2 warriors that seemed to be strangers that were the ones sent by the Maltha family to protect Adelo. "Move aside. You 2 pieces of trash, stop being a drag." Just when Lin Li was staring blankly, another warrior that was wielding a double-edged greatsword rushed over with his combat energy as well. It was just that this fella was more hot-tempered compared to his reserved companion. When he moved past Lin Li and Jonathan, he most likely felt that the 2 of them did not contribute much, so he even used a tone that had a mixture of contempt and disdain to scold them. Lin Li rubbed his nose, and obediently pulled Jonathan, moving back a few steps. "There was no choice, you couldn't possibly bite back if a dog bit you, right? Mage Felix, are you alright?" It was at this time that Reggie and the rest returned. When they saw what happened, Reggie was so frightened that his hair stood on its ends. Of course, what scared him was not that red leopard. Although that level 17 red leopard was powerful, if 4 level 15 and above bandits were to team up, killing it was not difficult. What frightened Reggie was what that warrior had said. "Frack, this fella really has some guts." 2 strong level 17 warriors and 4 bandits that were level 15 and above. Even if a legendary magical beast were to meet them, it would have some trouble. What more a mere level 17 red leopard? Hence, after Lin Li rubbed his nose, he retreated, feeling at ease. When compared to that battle that was full of bloodshed, Lin Li was more interested in that middle-aged mage that was concealing his true strength. He was a true master of disguise. Even in such a chaotic situation, he still maintained his cover. He had a somewhat panicked look that could not be concealed, and Lin Li even heard him make a few mistakes in his incantations. An archmage at the peak of level 17 would definitely not make mistakes in his incantations. Lin Li pouted his lips, and mumbled, "Pretty good disguise. It's a pity his luck is just too bad." The whole battle only carried on for a few minutes. The red leopard had smashed the ice wall with its head, and got stabbed in the chest by Reggie. After that, everything ended, and the level 17 magical crystal had landed into Reggie's pocket. This was an unspoken rule: whenever two groups of adventurers were taking part in a battle, whoever landed the last hit would be rewarded with the best loot. Less than an hour after the red leopard died, the advance party entered the Scar of Death. To their sides were steep mountain walls, and beneath their feet was dark brown mud, which felt wet and slippery when they stepped on it. In between, it even gave off a smoky smell. When they looked up, the sky above them seemed to be rather dark. The Scar of Death seemed like a wound that was carved out by a very sharp knife in the body of the Blackstone Mountains, and it always gave off a thick scent of blood. The first feeling that Lin Li got from the Scar of Death was desolation. The steep cliffs on both sides felt like a cage, separating the Scar of Death and the Blackstone Mountains into two different worlds. The soil below seemed to have died, and the dark brown mud constantly gave off a dilapidated aura. Even though the canyon was very wide, it gave off a stifling feeling when it was looked upon. Lin Li knew it was because the colors in the canyon were too monotonous. It was always so dull, just like the sky before a storm, a dried-up pond, or a dead plant. There was only dark brown earth as well as occasional bones exposed in the mud. Jonathan took out the map from his pocket. He gesticulated for a while, before he confidently pointed out a direction. Based on the map, this should be the right path. However, after he had spoken, even he could not help but swallow his saliva. In front was a cliff that had been cut by a knife and axe, and the only paths were those cracked openings on the cliff. A natural three-way fork was in front of everyone. All three paths seemed ghastly, but the one that Jonathan had pointed out was the ghastliest one of them. Bones covered the black earth wherever they looked, and they could tell some came from humans, while some were from magical beasts. There were also several rusty sets of equipment and armor scattered at the side. Some of them even had a faint magical wave. Looking at it all, even an idiot would know how much blood had soaked this black earth and what sort of intense battles had taken place on this path. This? Brother Felix. Do you think we should enter? Jonathan looked at those white skeletons, and could not help but stare blankly. It seems rather dangerous. Lin Li could not help but swallow his saliva. This time, he was not being a pretentious **CK. This route was really dangerous. Perhaps what others saw were just the skeletons, as well as 1,000 years of intense battling between humans and magical beasts, but Lin Li saw more than that. For Lin Li, this aura was all too familiar. The Shadow Glen from the Trials, the Demon Fall Valley's underground palace, and Sire Town's bell tower all had a similar aura. Indeed, this was the death aura that was unique to all undead creatures. It was just that the death aura here was much stronger than those Lin Li had seen before. Honestly, Lin Li was rather doubtful. Even Ujfalusi did not have such a powerful death aura during his heyday. Furthermore, it was at such an incomparably strange place, the Scar of Death. Who knew what would be hiding behind such a powerful death aura? Lin Li hesitated along with Jonathan, and they could not decide if they wanted to go in. Finally, the two bodyguards of Adalo got impatient. What was Master Hutton thinking, sending you pieces of trash over? If you are afraid of dying, just hide behind us obediently. Don't be a nuisance while holding the map. Both of them were powerful level 17 warriors, and had terrifying strength, allowing them to rip magical beasts apart with their bare hands. They walked over with a disdainful look, and a light shove from them was enough to push Lin Li and Jonathan to the side. It was especially so for Lin Li, a mage with a weak body. He stumbled a few steps backwards. If it were not because Jonathan had supported him in time, he most likely would have tripped, sprawling all over the ground. It's always better to be careful. Lin Li, who almost fell after being pushed, was not angry. He just smiled rather awkwardly. Careful my ass, can being careful feed you? The bodyguard that was carrying a double-edged greatsword sneered. Those that are afraid to die, scram. The Maltha family does not need useless trash. After saying this, they did not care about Lin Li's reaction. They protected Adalo on both sides as they walked towards the gorge that was filled with skeletons. For these two high-level warriors, a level 10 mage was not any stronger than an ant. They could squash him with just a finger if they felt like it. It was fine to push away such a small fry, who would even bother about how he felt? Brother Felix, are you all right? Jonathan looked concerned. The power of a high-level warrior was no laughing matter, even he himself was pushed away so easily. This young mage's body seemed rather frail, so who knew if he was injured? I'm fine. Lin Li smiled. Even though he was not a high-level warrior, he was a genuine blacksmith guru. How could a body that was tempered by the furnace and hammer be so easily injured just with a push? In fact, if he was not willing, even a level 17 warrior would not be able to push him aside so easily. As to why he'd stumbled back in such a pitiful manner, it was just because he wanted to give way to these two fellas. It was a bit like lining up to withdraw cash. Whoever was at the front would be able to get more money. However, it was also the opposite. This was the Scar of Death, a place full of danger. Whoever rushed in first would be more likely to be attacked by magical beasts. I can't wait to hide from something like that. Only idiots would compete with you. Looking at the stalwart backs of the two high-level warriors, Lin Li smiled despicably. This smile was rather strange, and Jonathan and Reggie could not understand it at all. They merely guessed that maybe this young mage underwent some sort of stress. Norfeller and Ujfalusi understood it, but for these two cold-blooded, undead creatures, how did it matter who died? As long as that young mage did not die, they would not even bother to bat their eyelids no matter who died. Only Rena rolled her eyes at Lin Li with contempt. If Master Inglos were to know that the genius pharmacist that he spoke of was actually so despicable, would he be so angry that he would roll his eyes? But facts proved that it was logical for Lin Li to be despicable. The road ahead was not smooth. The advance party had just entered this path for less than 10 minutes, and they had already encountered their first battle after entering the Scar of Death. It was a pack of at least 100 shadow wolves. Those that had never experienced it before would never understand what sort of feeling it was to be surrounded by a pack of 100 shadow wolves under the evening sky. Pairs of green eyes were dancing around in the darkness like phosphorescent light, which made anyone that saw it have goosebumps. The shadow wolf's level was not high, it was just level 12, so even Lin Li and Adalo, who had disguised themselves as level 10 mages, would be able to take out a few of them easily without exposing their true strength. But no matter how low level a magical beast was, it would become frightening when in large numbers. This was the conclusion that Lin Li had come to after he was attacked by hundreds of three-eyed blood wolves, back in Alana. This logic could also be applied to the Scar of Death. When over 100 shadow wolves charged in from every direction, they made for a sight that sent chills down everyone's spine. Their bodies were a mix of undead and magical beast, which looked like a fog under the night sky. Normal attacks weren't suited to kill them. In legends, they were monsters that were born from the resentment of a wild wolf that had died. They were born with an ability to negate some physical damage, and one had to use a weapon with elemental power, or rather magical weapons, to kill them. Magical weapons were uncommon, especially among adventurers that had no power or influence. It was even harder for them to get their hands on a decent magical weapon. Otherwise, Jason would not have spent his whole fortune on a rune's adamantine longsword back then. In the end, he had no choice but to take on a mission at Sire Town ruins that he would not have accepted in the past. The two high-level warriors did have such weapons. The greatsword and machete in their hands were decent magical equipment. The magical elements harbored by the machete and greatsword just happened to be ice and fire, and wielded by these two powerful warriors, the fire and ice elemental power were pushed to the limits, and barely any shadow wolf could get within 5 meters of them. Amidst the almost tangible combat energy, the blue and red shine were incomparably brilliant. There were also some magical weapons in the hands of Lin Li and the rest. For example, Norfeller had Heaven's Wrath, and Rena's Radiance Blade never left her side. Unfortunately, they could not use them at this point. Adventurers that had a magical weapon naturally attracted attention, especially when they were low-level adventurers like themselves. If they really used them now, it would scare Adelo to death even if they were to exterminate these shadow wolves. As for Jonathan, Reggie, and the rest, the weapons they used could only be barely described as sharp weapons. Each was sharp as it was, but it was thousands of miles apart from genuine magical weapons. At most, it was just goods that was sold for 30,000 to 50,000 gold coins at a weapons store. Naturally, it was not sufficient to deal with shadow wolves. However, this did not hamper Lin Li. He searched his pockets and quickly took out a few scrolls. Here's a scroll for each of you, just activate it with your combat energy. What is this scroll? Jonathan took one of the scrolls. He had a rather doubtful expression. The Sword of Flame's magical enchantment scroll. It allows your weapon to harbor flame energy, but it only lasts for an hour. After an hour, this type of flame energy would disappear. My God, Jonathan immediately got so frightened that his hands were shaking. He almost dropped the magical enchantment scroll in his hands. Hush. Don't disclose this, I stole it from my teacher. Lin Li was worried this fella would be loose-lipped, hence, he came up with a lie. Oh, only then did Jonathan let out a sigh of relief with a look of sudden realization. I knew it. Brother Felix is just a level 10 magic shooter, how could he have gotten so many magical enchantment scrolls? One ought to know that although magical enchantment scrolls did not have a permanent effect, they came with a rather expensive price tag in the market. A scroll like this sort of flame scroll was at least 10,000 gold coins apiece. Furthermore, one could not complain that it was expensive. It was fine if you did not buy it, there were many others lining up to buy it. For an adventurer, an hour's effect could very likely save a life during the most crucial points. It could not be helped. The market for magical items was like that. If this was a magical weapon or a permanent magical enchantment, the price would be shockingly higher. It could easily be in the tens of thousands of gold coins, and if it was really high, it could even exceed 1 million. Adventurers that were not at Jason's or Amanda's level simply had no right to ask about them at all. But, if he said that it was stolen from his teacher, it should be believable. Seeing that the other party was in his 20s yet having the standard of a level 10 magic shooter, Jonathan knew that Brother Felix's teacher would most likely be an archmage. Furthermore, it should be an elite archmage at level 17 or 18. Otherwise, he would not be able to cultivate such a young and promising student. Brother Felix, would you get into trouble? But after the sudden realization, Jonathan was rather concerned. In the eyes of this adventurer that had not been exposed to society much, mages were the weirdest bunch of people in this world. They locked themselves in a cold and cheerless tower, researching mythical knowledge that only they understood. Year after year and day after day, such a boring life would eventually devastate their minds, turning each of them into psychopaths. Furthermore, they got stronger as they aged, so they would definitely become even more psychopathic. Following this thought process, Brother Felix's teacher definitely had to be a fella that couldn't get any more psychopathic. If he were to discover that the magical enchantment scrolls were stolen, would he conduct magical experiments on Brother Felix in a fit of anger? Relax, my teacher has a lot of such scrolls. He definitely would not find out that I sneakily took a few. Lin Li went against his conscience and consoled him. There was no choice, he was really shy to tell Jonathan, that's right. That old Andoin does indeed have a lot of magical enchantment scrolls, but they were all given to him by myself. With Jonathan and the rest joining, the battle situation instantly changed. Even though there was a lot of shadow wolves, they only had the strength of level 12. Initially, they could struggle with their half-undead and half-magical beast body, but now there were 5 more fresh fighters that suddenly joined, and each of them had sharp magical weapons. Fire magical element, other than light magical element, was naturally the energy that undead creatures feared the most. When 5 weapons enchanted with the Sword of Flame started dancing, it was a total massacre for the Shadow Wolves. The Shadow Wolves' numbers got lower and lower. Even an idiot could tell that the advance party's victory was near. But at this time, Lin Li frowned. Although the 100 Shadow Wolves did not bring much danger to the advance party, they had affirmed Lin Li's hypothesis. The most dangerous thing about the Scar of Death was not some crazy magical beast, but the dark power that made magical beasts go crazy. It was because Lin Li knew that the Shadow Wolf was actually not some monster that was born out of the resentment of a dead wolf. They were just normal 3-eyed blood wolves, or a species of wolf that was weaker than the 3-eyed blood wolf. However, there was a very strong king in a pack of shadow wolves. This king could even be said to be their father. It was precisely because of the existence of this king that they could transform into a level 12 shadow wolf from a 3-eyed blood wolf no more than level 5. The king of the shadow wolves was called the Spirit Wolf. Spirit Wolf was just a name. When it was alive, it could possibly be just a level 5 3-eyed blood wolf, or a level 15 night demon wolf, but when it returned into the embrace of death and underwent the manipulation of the dark force, it only had one name, which was Spirit Wolf. Spirit wolves were genuine undead creatures. In essence, it was even purer than a vampire like Norfeller or a lich like Ujfalusi. It was because be it vampire or lich, they still retained some of the characteristics they had had when they were alive. If they were more careful, they could even live like normal humans. But spirit wolves were different. Only the purest of dark force could hasten the birth of such a frightening monster. They might retain some of their memories from when they were alive, but those were just merely instincts from the soul fire. Once they transformed into spirit wolves, they were already another entity altogether. When spirit wolves were born, they had the strength of at least level 18. Not only were they proficient in all sorts of necromagic, they also had a strange body that was half undead and half magical beast, which gave them an incomparable strength. In this aspect, even a vampire like Norfeller could not be compared to them. Indeed, Norfeller was a strong person that could rip apart the ice howler with his bare hands, but Lin Li believed that even Norfeller would be unable to handle the spirit wolves without using the heaven's wrath. This was because the spirit wolf's body naturally did not have a definite form, just like the nightmares from the Nightmare Mountains. They were a shapeless existence, and pure physical strength was unable to deal much damage to them. That natural instinct from the soul fire caused spirit wolves to constantly summon compatriots. Wolves were naturally social animals, and even if they were remade into spirit wolves by the dark force, this natural instinct that came from the soul fire was still unchangeable. There was not a single wolf pack that could resist this summoning, just like how not a single magical beast could resist the control of a prehistoric magical beast. It was the fear and submission towards the strong that was inborn among the weak. Those similar species that were summoned might not undergo any changes at the beginning, but as the days went by, the dark force within the spirit wolf would slowly change them. It would cause them to become a monster similar to the spirit wolf, transforming these monsters into the shadow wolves that Lin Li was looking at now. But, the thing that made Lin Li frown at this moment was not the father of these monsters, the legendary spirit wolf. What made Lin Li truly worried was the dark force that gave rise to the spirit wolf's emergence. Back then at Alana, Lin Li was on good terms with Sendros, and had this high priest from the Darkness Shrine talk about some stories about the spirit wolf. In the legends of the Darkness Shrine, the spirit wolf was a pet of the gods, and the aim of their existence was to search for offerings to gift to the gods. But, even Sendros had never seen a real spirit wolf before. In the ancient books of the Darkness Shrine, there had not been a single record about the spirit wolf for hundreds of years. The most recent one dated back to at least 700 years ago, the age when the Darkness Shrine was at its prime. That spirit wolf had caused a terrifying disaster in the north of the Leaden Kingdom. In the end, it was the 4 archbishops of the Brilliant Shrine that took action before this disaster that could have possibly engulfed the whole Leaden Kingdom was extinguished. Of course, that spirit wolf was extremely powerful. According to the Darkness Shrine's ancient records, that spirit wolf had existed since the middle of the Dark Ages. After being infused with dark force for countless years, it already had the power of almost level 20. This one at the Scar of Death was definitely not that powerful. It had been less than 1,300 years since the Dark Ages, so it would definitely not be some level 24 freak, no matter how suffused with dark force it was. Even though it was strong, it was not unbeatable, provided Lin Li was willing to work hard. If there was some cannon fodder willing to sacrifice themselves and buy some time for him, he would still have the chance of killing the spirit wolf after drinking all sorts of potions, summoning the Lord of Nightmares, and having the holy light of all evil forces. But the Maltha family did not give me a salary, so why would I work so hard? Lin Li had never been a person that faced death with no regrets. It was the exact opposite. This Shoal was possibly one of the people most fearful of death, hence, he came to Anril to try and become stronger. Be it through stealing, snatching, or lying, as long as he could become stronger, he would use any means necessary. It was all just so that he could continue living. Asking a person like him that was afraid of death to go up against the spirit wolf? Why wouldn't you cut off a piece of his flesh instead? Lin Li looked at Adelo, who was reciting spells, and started calculating. Should I bring this fella along with me? This guy seems to know quite a bit about the plans of the Maltha family. If I were to bring him back to the Tower of Dusk for interrogation, it should be a decent choice. F***ck. What happened? It was at this moment that Lin Li felt that his finger was suddenly scorching hot. The instant the heat came about, Lin Li had already reacted. It was the Ring of Endless Storm. This sudden change almost scared Lin Li to death. This heat was too abnormal. The Ring of Endless Storm had been worn by him for so long, but nothing like this had happened before. Even Canoris, that despicable and cunning fella, could not do much in the Ring of Endless Storm. Why did the Ring of Endless Storm become like this, when it had been fine so far? Panicking, Lin Li did not care about the Shadow Wolf. He just inserted a sliver of mental strength into the Ring of Endless Storm. After that, he saw a dumbfounding scene. The holy light that had been sitting silently inside the Ring of Endless Storm had suddenly gone into a frenzy. Just like a rampaging bull, it was charging all about in that boundless dimensional space. The incomparably blazing white light had illuminated the whole world, while the terrifying divine power had been emitted in a disorderly manner, causing the almost infinite dimensional space to be in tremors. That sliver of mental strength had just been inserted, and it had been already bound by that frantic divine power, turning into fragments in an instant. Why? Why is this happening? Luckily, Lin Li's mental strength was abnormally powerful. Although some had been ripped into shreds by the divine power, it did not have any effect on his body. If this was an average mage, just the loss of mental strength would be sufficient for him to permanently lose part of his ability level. But, there being no effect on mental strength, did not mean that Lin Li did not feel surprised. This terrifying scene was something that Lin Li had not seen before, or even thought of. How was this happening? Why had the quiet and peaceful holy light suddenly become so frantic? Could it be that it's because of the dark force that spawned the spirit wolf? Lin Li spoke to himself, but then shook his head. It should not be. Although the dark force that created the spirit wolf was powerful, it was not powerful enough to send the holy light into a frenzy. It should be known that even when he was in the endless world, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were not so frantic when he had shot the dragon of destruction, Azardas, dead. The only similar situation should be the one at the Well of the Sun. At that point, Lin Li had just acquired the Stars of Fury. He still had not known how to control this weapon used by gods, and a very accidental mistake caused him to fuse holy light and gloomy dark together. An elemental storm that almost destroyed the whole Well of the Sun had been created under the collision of the forces of light and darkness back then. Wait, gloomy dark? When Lin Li thought about this, he had a stunned expression on his face that was hard to conceal. Could it be that the dark force that was giving rise to the spirit wolf is gloomy dark? In the legends, the gods used the 7 elemental powers of earth, water, fire, wind, light, darkness, and chaos to create the 7 bolts of Stars of Fury. They only needed a small hit, and it could shatter the stars. One of the holy light had been used by Lin Li at Sire Town's ruins. Although it did not shatter stars like the legends, it had shattered the humorous domain of a legendary realm lich, thereby killing a humorous WYRM that was equally powerful. The holy light's power came from light, and the gloomy dark's power came from darkness. After thinking through everything, the death aura coming from depths of the canyon was not as pressurizing as before. Lin Li could faintly feel a familiar sense of warmth, and even heard a small voice calling out to him in his ears. This voice had transcended time and space. In his ears, it was identical to the one at the Well of the Sun. I understand now. Following this clue, Lin Li had realized a lot. After coming to the Blackstone Mountains, he had suddenly become enlightened about all the things that he could not understand, be it the plans of the Maltha family, or the goal of the advance party. Lin Li even somewhat guessed the true identity of Tutankhamun, who had once eaten roasted boar with him. Seems like the Blackstone Mountains are to become more interesting. Lin Li had a smile on his face. When he entered the canyon, his steps were as firm and steady as before. Meanwhile, a small silhouette flashed by the camp that was not far from the Scar of Death. Under the shadow of the evening sky, this small silhouette was like a spirit as it entered into Hutton's tent stealthily. "Young Master Hutton, I have returned." "Yes." Hutton had a thick woolen blanket wrapped around his body, and held a magic book with a black cover. When the small figure entered the tent, Hutton, who was focused on reading, did not even raise his head. He just casually asked, "Where did Weather go this afternoon?" Weather did not go too far. He just went to a forest near the Scar of Death, and then saw a mage called Gavin over there. "Gavin?" Hutton frowned, and gently put down the magic book in his hands. "Tell me what happened in detail. Remember, do not leave out a single word." "Yes." The small silhouette bent forward slightly. With a respectful posture that was almost humble, it recounted everything he had seen to this young heir of the Maltha family. The process of Weather and Gavin meeting was naturally long, plus Hutton had ordered him to absolutely not leave out a single detail. Hence, this small silhouette spent almost half an hour before he had completely recounted everything. "You mean, the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic?" "Yes." "Bring Han over." "Oh, yes." "Amanda's as well." "Roger." Not even 5 minutes later, there were hurried footsteps coming from outside of the tent. Han and Amanda's entered the tent almost simultaneously. Both their faces were full of confusion. It was already so late, so why did Master Hutton call them over? "Han, is there a mage called Felix among the adventurers that you have recruited this time?" "Why, yes." Han swallowed his saliva with difficulty. His face was covered in cold sweat. Han, who had worked for the Maltha family for more than 10 years, knew the temperament of young Master Hutton better than anyone else. If the latter were to know that Han had helped Sir Harvey do those things, even having 10 lives would not save him. It was especially so for the issue of the advance party. Back at Blackstone Town, Hutton had already repeatedly emphasized that the advance party entering the Scar of Death was the most important part of the whole plan. The members of the advance party had to be those that were known through and through. They could not be too strong or too smart, and their background could not be too complicated. It was best that their past could be discerned easily. Initially, Han had indeed acted according to these strict standards when picking candidates. He chose Reggie and then Jonathan, but after that mage called Felix actually came forward. He volunteered to go to the Scar of Death with Jonathan. Han was obsessed back then, and only wanted to please Sir Harvey. Thus, he actually agreed to it. He thought that it was courting death to go to the Scar of Death anyway. Sir Hutton would not notice a young mage with no status or background like him either. Back then, he thought that he had done things without anyone knowing, but he did not imagine that Sir Hutton would look for him for answers in just half a day. Han knew that this was the biggest taboo for Sir Hutton. Just thinking about the methods of this first heir of the Maltha family, Han could not help but shed cold sweat. What do I do? What do I do? Should I push all the responsibility to Sir Harvey? Where is he right now? Hutton gently put down the magic book in his hands. His expression was abnormally calm, and even Amanda's, who was nearest to him, did not know what this first heir of the Maltha family was thinking about. But Han knew. After working for the Maltha family for so many years, Han could not be any clearer about the personality of the first young master. The calmer his expression was, the more furious it meant he was. Just thinking about the terrifying rage that was behind such calmness, Han did not care much anymore. With a plop, Han knelt down. Without waiting for Hutton to speak, he slapped himself with pack, 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 while sobbing to beg for mercy. I deserve to die. I deserve to die. Sir Hutton, please be merciful. Please spare me this time, on the account that I have worked for the Maltha family for so many years. Spare you this time? Hutton's expression was as calm as before, but his tone slowly started becoming colder. Back at Blackstone Town, I have already told you before. The members of the advance party must be known through and through. This plan involves the whole Maltha family's gains. There absolutely mustn't be any uncontrollable factor involved. You promised me there would not be problems, but now, a stranger has appeared within the advance party. Han, can you explain to me what is going on? I deserve to die. I deserve to die. Han slumped onto the ground just like a pile of mud, only his hands were desperately slapping himself. Furthermore, each slap was harder than before. His sharp and long face had been slapped till it was swollen and round. This really has nothing to do with me. Sir Hutton. It was Sir Harvey that made me do this. Harvey? Harvey's face blackened. Bring Harvey to me. After a short moment, Harvey walked into the tent with a sleepy look. Big brother, why are you looking for me? Harvey had just walked into the tent when he saw that Harvey's face was purple with rage. In an instant, his head tightened. The second young master of the Maltha family was not afraid of anything, and did not even care much about his own father. Yet, in the face of his own brother, he had never dared to be presumptuous. Harvey was only 2 years younger than Hutton. It could be said that both of them grew up together, but it was also because of this that Harvey could be said to understand Hutton the most. He had seen this brother that was 2 years older than him seek tutelage under Master Cheyenne, and then he saw him use 20 years to transform from a mage apprentice into a level 18 archmage. He watched him take part in the management of the family at the age of 12, and watched as he made the Maltha family stronger every day. In Harvey's eyes, his own brother was somebody omnipotent. In an average family, the competition between the first son and younger sons was always bloody and cruel. It was because once the first son died, the position of the heir would definitely fall into the hands of the younger son. But the Maltha family did not have this problem, because Harvey would definitely not fight with Hutton for the position of the heir. It was not that he did not want to, it was because he did not dare to. When he was very, very young, Harvey already knew that the gap between Hutton and himself was giant. Thus, Harvey never dared to compete with Hutton for anything. Other than respect, Harvey also had a deep-rooted fear of this older brother that was 2 years older than him. I heard that you let Han enlist a mage, called Felix, into the advance party? Harvey was not really an idiot. Although he looked like he was miles apart from Hutton usually, this was also because of Hutton's judgment. In terms of intelligence, he had not reached the stage of being an idiot beyond help. When he heard Hutton's question, Harvey's expression was stiff because he knew that something had to have happened regarding the matter he had asked Han to handle. Speak. Hutton's voice abruptly rose. The fear that was deep-rooted since young immediately made Harvey's knees weak. Why yes. After that, there was a crisp pack. Hutton's slap landed right on Harvey's face. Idiot. Hutton's face was purple with anger, and his hand was trembling. I said this long ago. I told you not to come, but you insisted on coming. Great, look at it yourself. What have you done? Harvey held his face with one hand, he was lost in an instant. Indeed, he had been beaten by Hutton quite a number of times since he was young, but there was not a single time he had been beaten in front of so many people. Harvey looked at Hutton with a shocked expression as though he did not really understand why his big brother had suddenly become so furious. Tell me, why did you do this? I took a liking to the female adventurer that was with him. When Hutton heard this, he was so angry that he almost had a heart attack. He raised his hand and almost let loose another slap, but luckily his hand was stopped by Amanda's. Sir Hutton, please calm down. Sir Harvey is still young and clueless. Just tell him nicely. Everyone is family, there's no need for things to be so rigid. After being pulled back by Amanda's, Hutton's slap didn't follow. After Hutton calmed down for a bit, he also remembered that this younger brother that had grown up together with him had always been respectful even though he was not too smart. After thinking about this, Hutton's expression became warmer. Seeing the change in Hutton's expression, Harvey let out a sigh of relief quietly. He carefully gave off a smiling face while pitifully trying to justify himself. Big brother, that's just a low-level mage. What can he possibly do to you? A mage? When Hutton heard this, the rage that he had suppressed just now surged up again. Idiot, do you still remember that last month? Father told us that the Supreme Council had finally set its sights on the breezy plains and established a new guild of magic at Dooland? Back then, Father told us worryingly that this time round, the Supreme Council's involvement would very likely change the hierarchy of powers in the whole breezy plains. Harvey was instantly stunned. What you mean is that Felix is a member of the Guild of Magic? Member? Hutton's face gave off a cold smile. If he was just a member of the Guild of Magic, why would I call you over in the middle of the night? I told you long ago to pay attention to the news of the border regularly, but you just spend your days willfully with those idiotic friends. If you are to continue to this, Father will chase you out of the Maltha family sooner or later. Did you not hear anything about such a huge news such as the establishment of a Guild of Magic? What news? The president of the Guild of Magic is a young mage in his 20s, and his name is Felix. How can this be? Harvey almost jumped up. You're saying that this Felix in the advance party is the president of the Guild of Magic? Indeed, Hutton nodded his head and glared at Harvey fiercely. Don't think that I'm pulling your leg. This was heard by Becca today in the afternoon. This Felix that you have assigned to the advance party to be sent to his death. There is 80 to 90% chance he is the owner of the Tower of Dusk, the newly appointed president of the Guild of Magic. When Harvey heard this, he suddenly laughed. I still wondered what was going on. So, the Guild of Magic that you and Father have been worrying about had appointed such an inferior mage to be the president. In the end, you and Father have been worrying for nothing. Big brother, don't say that I caused trouble for you. In this world, everything requires strength. So what if this Felix is the president of the Guild of Magic? He's just a level 10 magic shooter at the very most. After entering the Scar of Death, Adelo would be able to deal with him with just a finger, and coincidentally help you and Father settle this big problem. Idiot. Hutton was so angry that he stomped his feet. Do you think that the Supreme Council would be as stupid as you and assign a level 10 magic shooter to be the president of the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic? Okay, I know that you are trying to tell me that this Felix is hiding his true strength, Harvey pouted, and turned a deaf ear to Hutton's words. From his perspective, this brother of his was excellent in everything, but he was too careful when dealing with issues. He was afraid to commit himself, and was just scaring himself in the end. But no matter how he conceals it, he would not be stronger than Adelo, right? Big brother, don't forget that Adelo is your senior. He is also Master Cheyenne's disciple. With his peak level 17 power, could it be that he can't handle a mage in his 20s? No, Hutton held it back again and again before he stopped himself from cursing. Looking at this useless younger brother of his, Hutton started becoming annoyed. In the end, he let out a long sigh, and patiently explained, when the Guild of Magic had just been established, Father had already deployed people to investigate it. This president was not assigned randomly. Apparently, in order to select this guild's president, the Supreme Council had organized a trial. The 24 guilds of magic in the Felon Kingdom had each sent forth their best disciple. In the end, it was this Felix from the Gerosis Guild of Magic that emerged victorious. Think about it yourself, how could this Felix that stood out from all of the genius mages be an average person? When Harvey heard this, he could not help but panic. What should we do now? What to do? Hutton heaved a sigh, and called Amendes over. Amendes, notify Adelo immediately, tell him to be careful of that Felix. If there really is a need, then just use that gem that I have given him. Roger. Big brother, you mean that gem? Harvey swallowed his saliva, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. That gem was given to you by Master Cheyenne to be used at the most crucial moment. And you still dare to talk about it. If you hadn't got Felix into the advance party, how would we have ended up in such deep waters? But, Harvey opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Still, Harvey did not approve of Hutton's decision. From Harvey's perspective, no matter how hard a 20-year-old mage tried to conceal his strength, it would not be much, unless he really was an archmage? A 20-year-old archmage, what a joke. Was he supposed to be the next Juresco? Take 1,000 steps back, so what even if he really was an archmage? Could it be that he could escape from Adelo's grasp? Adelo was Hutton's senior, and a disciple of legendary realm mage, Cheyenne. He apparently already was an archmage at the peak of level 17 a few months ago. Other than Hutton, Harvey had not seen any mage stronger than him. How many geniuses, like Hutton, were there in Anrel? After lecturing Harvey, Hutton looked at Amendes again. The face that was originally furious and annoyed slowly started smiling. Amendes, you've done well. You did not cause problems together with Harvey. Hutton was an intelligent person. Even though he did not know that Harvey looked for Amendes, and did not know how Amendes rejected Harvey, after connecting dots together, he could immediately guess most of what had happened. I'm sorry, Sir Hutton. It's my fault for not stopping Sir Harvey in time and letting things escalate to this degree. No, this has nothing to do with you, Hutton shook his head. Furthermore, the situation doesn't seem so bad at this point. Adelo just needs to hang on for another night. Just one more night would do. When our allies set off tomorrow morning, this Felix would not be able to do anything much even if he really has exceptional capabilities. After the advance party had entered the canyon, Lin Li finally experienced how formidable the Scar of Death was. The 100 shadow wolves at the start was just the appetizer, they were nothing much when compared to the dangers that followed next. After turning the last shadow wolf into ashes with a flaming storm, Lin Li did not even have the chance to catch his breath when he heard a faint sound coming from the earth beneath his feet. Lin Li had undergone a trial at the Shadow Glen, and rescued a castellan's son at the Sire Town's ruins. Of course, he was clearer than anyone else what this faint sound meant. Careful. Before the first skeletal warrior crawled out, Lin Li only had the time to say that single word before his vision was obscured by thick and black dust. Countless skeletal warriors were pushing the earth aside as they clumsily crawled out of the soil, slowly. Numerous green will-o-wisps were flickering in the air, and there were waves of shrieks and groans coming through. The pale skeleton spread an atmosphere of unusual terror all over under the moonlight. Lin Li started reciting the flaming storm without even thinking. Countless fire dragons, bearing fangs and brandishing claws, let out roars. They crashed into the bodies of the skeletal warriors fiercely. After that, there was a deafening blast. The brilliant flares lit up most of the sky. But after the brilliant flare flashed by, Lin Li's expression changed. Although that flaming storm was just a level 8 spell, it could destroy at least 20 skeletal warriors even despite him deliberately suppressing his strength. But looking at the numerous skeletal warriors in front, less than 10 had been struck down. What is going on? Lin Li was immediately somewhat confused. Could it be that several days of pretending to be a level 10 magic shooter had actually caused his power to deteriorate? Lin Li did not believe this, and released 4 or 5 consecutive flaming storms. In the end, the destructive power did not change much. The flaming storm that originally could destroy at least 30 skeletal warriors had once again destroyed less than 10. Such a loss was negligible for these numerous skeletal warriors. With a barrage of flaming storms, the skeletal warriors' numbers did not decrease, but instead increased more and more because of Lin Li's recitation. It was at this moment that a thought flashed past Lin Li's mind. Or is it because of gloomy dark? Indeed, this really could be a possibility. Thinking about this, Lin Li suddenly understood. The legendary sharp weapons, debris of the stars, naturally had their own souls. Even if there was no stars of fury to operate them, they would still release their power automatically. Back then, in the underground palace in the Demon Fall Valley, didn't holy light kill off a lich that just completed transformation? Gloomy dark had been hidden in the scar of death for so many years, so the undead creatures that it created were definitely stronger than the normal ones. But, this was not good news for Lin Li. There were at least hundreds of skeletal warriors climbing out of the ground at the moment, and their number seemed to be increasing. Almost every inch of the ground in every direction had skeletal warriors crawling out incessantly of it. The scene looked like a swarm of locusts, and gave Lin Li goosebumps. Furthermore, they were no longer normal skeletal warriors after they had been strengthened by Gloomy Dark's power. Gloomy Dark itself was the purest and strongest dark force. For undead creatures and demons, it was a source of power that they were dying to obtain. Under bathing in the darkness of Gloomy Dark for thousands of years, even the lowest level undead creatures, the skeletal warriors, had also become an incomparably nasty existence. Based on Lin Li's judgment, these skeletal warriors were at least level 8. If it was under normal circumstances, a level 8 skeletal warrior was nothing much. Forget Lin Li, even the weakest of those present, Jonathan, could take down tens of them easily. But right in front of their eyes, how could there only be tens of them? If they were to really count them, then there were at least 100 times more than tens of them. Furthermore, Lin Li believed that if this were to continue, it would only take a few minutes before they multiplied by 200 times or even 300 times. The skeletal warriors of the Scar of Death were endless. Only pale skeletons could be seen climbing out of the ground continuously, swinging their rusty machetes about and approaching the group with clumsy and slow footsteps. Master, they seem to be different. This time even Ujvalusi, this ex-lich, could not help but feel alarmed. A growth from level 5 to level 8 was no laughing matter. It was an increase of 3 whole levels, and was especially serious when it applied to thousands of skeletal warriors, becoming even more terrifying. It was as though a flock of sheep had transformed into a pack of hungry wolves. What was a situation that could have been easily resolved had now been changed into a scene of despair. Yes, I noticed, Lin Li nodded, and then looked at Adalo, who was far away. At this time Adalo seemed to have heard something. His complexion was focused and serious. The 2 high-level warriors beside him were using their greatsword and machete to protect him steadfastly. Adalo raised his head as though he had felt Lin Li's gaze. He looked towards Lin Li from afar, and then softly gave out orders to the 2 bodyguards. After that, Lin Li saw the 2 high-level warriors nod their heads and start to intentionally draw closer to Lin Li while protecting Adalo. Fel. Brother Felik, I really implicated you this time. After cutting down tens of skeletal warriors consecutively, the double-edged greatsword in Jonathan's hand, which had not been sharp to begin with, started to become blunt. Luckily, the magical enchantment effect of the Sword of Flames was still present. Although it could not splice skeletal warriors apart directly, the fire magical element attached to it could still do some damage. However, the skeletal warriors were too many. After cutting down one, there would be more to fill up its spot immediately. No matter how hard Jonathan fought, there was still an endless number of skeletal warriors in front of him. This feeling invoked a sense of stifling despair in Jonathan. What's the point of saying this? Lin Li could not help but show a bitter smile. He softly recited low-level spells while observing Adalo, who was drawing closer to him. All the while till this point, Lin Li still did not expose his true power. He still dutifully carried on acting as a level 10 magic shooter, but it was not because he had confidence in overcoming this crisis. Instead, he was just waiting for Adalo to expose his true power. All of this carried a certain element of a gamble. Everyone was a magic shooter, so on what basis were you more precious? You were not willing to show your true power, right? Then I'd continue putting on a show. The high-level warrior's combat strength was indeed valiant. In less than 5 minutes, Adalo, under the protection of the 2 high-level warriors, had managed to pull out from the heavy encirclement and join up with Lin Li and the rest, who were trapped in a dead end. Mage Felix, this was the first time Adalo spoke to Lin Li ever since they'd entered the Scar of Death. This middle-aged mage's voice was rather hoarse, but it was not so bad if not listened to closely. I believe you have seen it as well. These skeletal warriors are not normal. I think it's time we cooperate for once. Haha, Mage Adalo really knows how to make jokes. I am a young junior, how could I have the qualifications to cooperate with you? But if you were to have any solution, I would try my best to coordinate with you. Haha, Adalo laughed. He did not argue with Lin Li whether it was cooperating or coordinating. I wonder what sort of solution does Mage Adalo have? A terrifying dark force is controlling these skeletal warriors. As long as this dark force is around, these skeletal warriors will never be totally eradicated. Furthermore, based on my knowledge, there are other stronger undead creatures in the Scar of Death other than skeletal warriors. It could be vampires, death knights, or liches. Anyway, this dark force's strength is above anyone's imagination. Lin Li almost drew in a breath of cold air. Under the enhancement of Gloomy Dark, the skeletal warrior's power had been raised from level 5 to level 8. This was still barely acceptable, but if it was a lich, then it would be raised from level 20 to level 23. Even if his own mentor, Andoin, were to come here personally, wouldn't he run away in fright as well? There is only one way to exterminate them. Lin Li smiled, and finished his words. Cut off the dark force that is controlling them. That's right. Unfortunately, we are clueless about that dark force. We don't know where is its source, and neither do we know how to disrupt its control over the skeletal warriors. I know, Adalo smiled mysteriously. He used the magic staff in his hands to point out a direction. There is a cave in that direction. Deep inside the cave, there is an altar. All we need to do is break through the skeletal warrior's encirclement, enter that cave, and destroy the altar inside. So that's how it was. Lin Li had a look of realization, but he cursed on the inside. I would be an idiot if I believed you. Frankly, Adalo's words were pretty flawless. Although it might not work when deceiving an average person, under the pressure of countless skeletal warriors, most of them would nod and agree. After all, everybody knew that these skeletal warriors could not be exterminated. They could only listen to Adalo and do accordingly if they wanted to survive. Unfortunately, it was Lin Li that Adalo met this time. Lin Li was clearer than anybody else where the source of this dark force was. What altar? Bulsh *T. However, Lin Li did not expose Adalo's lies on the spot. It was because Lin Li himself was skilled in lying. He was clearer than most people what was the key factor in telling lies. Out of 10 sentences, at least 8 of them had to be true. Only the most crucial 2 sentences were lies. The altar that Adalo spoke of was definitely a lie, but that cave part was mostly true. Furthermore, Lin Li could faintly feel that Gloomy Dark's aura was coming from that direction. Things had already developed to this stage, and Lin Li had already understood that the Maltha family's goal was mostly related to Gloomy Dark that was in the Scar of Death. Even if this was not their final goal, it was at least a crucial step. Otherwise, they would not have dispatched Adalo, this archmage at the peak of level 17. But Lin Li was very curious. The understanding that the Maltha family had of the Gloomy Dark was not as simple as he had heard. Adalo could even accurately point out Gloomy Dark's location. Could it be that everything was related to that map? If this was the case, then the Maltha family had quite a number of clues in their grasp. There could even be someone in the Maltha family that had seen Gloomy Dark with their own eyes before. Otherwise, Adalo would not be able to remain so confident. Lin Li even dared to bet on his brains that what Adalo knew was far more than what Lin Li had ever imagined. But there was another thing, and it was something that Adalo would never, ever know about. Adalo would never have imagined that this young mage standing in front of him was the previous owner of Gloomy Dark. Lin Li, who used to own the 7 debris of the stars, knew more about them than anybody else. If there was anybody that could still operate Gloomy Dark in this world, then that person would undoubtedly be Lin Li. Of course, Lin Li would never tell Adelo that. Now, Lin Li was waiting. He was waiting to give this archmage, who was good at disguising himself, a very big surprise. I wonder what sort of solution Mage Adelo has. I know that there is a path nearby. It can allow us to temporarily escape from the skeletal warrior's pursuit. Oh? Once Lin Li heard this, he knew that he had guessed correctly. Adelo indeed did know quite a bit. Under Adelo's guidance, the 12 of them continued fighting while retreating. They used about half an hour before they reached the location that Adelo spoke of. That place did indeed have a path. It was narrow and steep, and the entrance of the path was a cave that barely had space for two to walk side by side. Adelo was right, this cave's entrance would be able to stop the skeletal warrior's pursuit. After all, those skeletal warriors were just level 8. If they did not charge over and swarm them, even Jonathan could be a hero that took on 100 of them. By that time, they would be delayed for a long while just by any random summoned creature. Adelo had done just that. The 12 of them had just entered the cave in a single file when Adelo took out a scroll from his pocket. After a short recitation, the scroll immediately vaporized, turning into a black fog. After that, an ironback blue wolf appeared, guarding the entrance of the cave steadfastly. Why is he so stingy? Lin Li pouted in secret. Nowadays, there were two types of summoning scrolls that were most commonly seen on the market. One of them was the level 12 ironback blue wolf, and the other was a level 14 storming bear. From Lin Li's perspective, the level 14 storming bear was the most suitable for blocking the cave's entrance. Its powerful physical strength as well as the wind attribute magic it was born with was the most suitable for being the rear guard. Lin Li believed that everybody would not have to worry about the skeletal warrior's pursuit till dusk set in tomorrow if there was a level 14 storming bear standing at the entrance of the cave. In comparison, the ironback blue wolf, which was cheaper by about 10,000 gold coins, was much weaker. It could only hold out till the next morning because its physical strength was insufficient. Lin Li's opinion was simple: since they were all summons, why not summon a storming bear to save strength? After all, Adelo was able to purchase the scroll for summoning the ironback blue wolf. There was no way he could not purchase the one for summoning the storming bear. Luckily, Adelo did not know what this fellow was thinking about. Otherwise, he would be so angry that he would vomit blood. The scroll for summoning the ironback blue wolf cost at least 20,000 gold coins. Furthermore, it was a consumable. After using it once, it would lose its effect. Even though Adelo did not have a low position in the Maltha family, he only had 3 of these scrolls, and usually treated them like treasure. He only took one out to use it today, yet this fella mocked him for being stingy. The ironback blue wolf stood at the entrance of the cave. The surging skeletal warriors seemed to crash into an iron wall, losing the advantage in number, and the flaws of the skeletal warriors were instantly exposed. 3 to 5 ordinary skeletal warriors were completely not a match for the ironback blue wolf. Before they could charge forward, they had already been ripped into pieces by the sharp claws and teeth. Okay, everybody take a break first. After Adelo brought everyone into the cave, he continued moving forward for another hour before he stopped at an empty hillside. The ironback blue wolf can hold out for one night. We should take this chance to rest up and leave tomorrow first thing in the morning. A whole day of walking as well as continuous battles had long completely exhausted everyone. Now, they finally escaped from those skeletal warriors with difficulty. Everyone seemed to have fallen asleep right away, occasionally giving rhythmic snores. However, neither Lin Li nor Adelo slept. It was not that they did not want to, but rather they did not dare to. Things had already developed to this stage, and there was not much secrecy left between these two mages that were good at disguising themselves. They both knew that the other was concealing his true strength, and neither was relaxed at all. If they were to sleep now, wouldn't the other party seize this opportunity? Mage Adelo, aren't you sleeping? No, no. Everyone is rather worn out from being busy the whole day. I did not exert much strength today, so I'll just keep a lookout for everyone. Haha, Lin Li laughed, but he was cursing in his mind. Look at your F*King*SS. If I dared to sleep, you would definitely harm me. Oh, yes. Mage Felix, why aren't you sleeping, either? Lin Li looked at Adalo with a despicable smile. I'm not used to spending the night in the wild. I am worried that I will have nightmares when I sleep. For example, getting slashed by somebody, being bombarded by magic while being tied up, or something like that. It's very scary. Haha, Adalo curled his lips, and his laughter was drier than sand. Mage Felix really loves to crack jokes. In the end, both of these fellas with devil tails did not sleep. They each found a space in a corner, and meditated for the whole night. The next morning, while Lin Li and the rest had not departed yet, the base camp near the Scar of Death had welcomed some guests. There were more than 10 people seated within Hutton's tent. Other than some important personnel from the Maltha family, there was Vanscore, the leader of the Sire Bandits, as well as his best subordinate Roland. Additionally, Garza, the president of Doolin's Blacksmith Guild, was here as well. A warrior in his 30s accompanied him, and from the way Garza addressed him, he should be the strongest adventurer in Doolin other than Jason, Rolf. Other than them, there was a mage from the Leaden Kingdom. If Lin Li was here, he would most likely be able to recognize him with just a look. This bony mage that was emitting a strong death aura was actually the High Priest of the Darkness Shrine, Mr. Sendros, the legendary realm necromancer. It was just that Sendros was much more refined today as compared to when he'd been Alana. At least he did not bring along his magic staff that was made of bone, and he did not summon a few skeletons as his henchmen. He just wore a grey robe and held an ordinary magic staff. He did not look any different from an average mage. Of course, this was just on the surface. No one present dared to look at him as though he was just an average mage. Master Sendros, if Mentor Cheyenne were to know that you are here as well, he would be very happy. Hutton had a pleasantly surprised look on his face. Back when he was sending an invitation to Sendros, he was only trying. After all, he was a genuine legendary realm powerhouse. Although the Maltha family had an immense power, it was not at the point where a legendary realm powerhouse would have to respect them. Back when he sent the invitation, he was only hoping that Sendros would take Mentor Cheyenne's reputation into account and offer to help. I am here for another reason, it has nothing to do with Cheyenne. Sendros' voice was cold and hoarse. The words he spoke did not have any regard for Hutton's feelings, but there was nobody in the tent that felt that it was improper. Even Hutton himself did not think that Sendros' words were disrespectful towards Mentor Cheyenne. With Sendros' strength and position, he naturally did not have to respect anyone. Be at ease, I will definitely deliver on what I have promised. Hutton smiled. He did not mind Sendros' rudeness. In fact, Sendros being able to attend was the best news for Hutton. At this time, he was just being rude with his words. Even if Sendros were to slap him, he would just smile and offer the other cheek. All right. After greeting Sendros, Hutton then chatted with a few others. After that, he called Jason and Amanda's over. Pass down the order. Everyone prepare to move out. Yes. After half an hour, a gigantic adventurer party started to advance towards the Scar of Death. At this point, Lin Li and the rest had already left the cave. They were moving along the steep and narrow path, advancing towards the canyon below the hillside. The road ahead was even, and the surroundings were extraordinarily clean. During the journey, Lin Li and the rest did not see a single bone, and even that thick death aura had become much fainter. It was worlds apart when compared to yesterday's gloomy and ghastly scene. But Adalo's expression did not relax a little at all. On the contrary, Adalo seemed to have become another person after he had passed through the cave. His every move was very careful. Lin Li did not dare to be careless after seeing him in this state, and was constantly using the warlock's eyes for surveillance. They had only left the cave and walked for a few miles, and he had already used at least 50 warlock's eyes. Who knew that this surveillance would really allow Lin Li to detect something? Frack, so many bats. There were a lot of bats. Within the warlock's eye's field of vision, there was pitch-black flock of bats flying out from behind the hillside, which looked like a thundercloud coming before a storm. This nightmarish scene made Lin Li's mouth wide open. This was not a joke. Every bat was a vampire, and there were at least 100 of them in this pitch-black patch. This also meant that more than 100 vampires were waiting for them. This is too much of a joke. In an instant, Lin Li felt that his mind was blank. So many? At this time, Adelo started to panic as well. His face immediately turned pale when he looked at the flock of pitch-black bats, and beads of sweat the size of beans started to trickle down his forehead. Vampires were in the scar of death. They had a terrifying speed like spirits, and were naturally proficient in all sorts of dark magic, causing them to be born with strength of at least level 10. Furthermore, one could not forget this was the scar of death, that Gloomy Dark was lying in the depths of. Under the influence of Gloomy Dark's power, even skeletal warriors could reach level 8. What about vampires that were much more powerful than skeletal warriors? Duh. This was just a tragic ending. They had expanded a Herculean effort, and even used a ironback blue wolf summoning scroll that was worth 20,000 gold coins, before they finally escaped from the skeletal warriors' encirclement. Who knew that in the blink of an eye, they had encountered more than 100 vampires? Was there anything more ironic in this world than this? If they'd known it was going to turn out this way, they would have rather fought it out with the skeletal warriors. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets now. Just when everyone was dumbfounded, a few bats already descended from the sky. A black fog rose up, and instantly transformed into the shape of a vampire, with a pale face and razor-sharp claws. The vampires were emitting a thick scent of blood from their bodies. They arched their bodies and gave out a low roar as though they were starving wolves. Lin Li knew that they were completely different from Norfeller. Even though Norfeller was a vampire, he had retained perfect memory and soul. Furthermore, he had formed a blood oath with Lin Li, making him not any different from a real human. As for those in front of them, they were totally undead creatures. They had no thoughts nor consciousness, and only knew slaughter and destruction. The only thing that could control them was Gloomy Dark, that was hidden within the depths of the scar of death. The number of bats descending from the sky grew. In the midst of the black fog, there were bats transforming into the figures of vampires, while the scent of blood in the surroundings grew thicker and thicker. In the blink of an eye, those vampires had blocked off the escape route of the advance party. Everything happened so quickly that nobody could react to it. The two high-level warriors had just drawn their weapons when a large group of vampires charged over. The razor-sharp claws tore the air, and the sizzling sound of the air being ripped apart were like venomous snakes swimming when heard. The strength of the vampires was on a whole new level when compared to the skeletal warriors that were on the other side of the hill, and the high-level warriors that could originally sweep through hundreds of skeletal warriors single-handedly were now out of breath when entangled by more than 10 vampires. The combat energy that was protecting their bodies could not defend against the vampires' razor-sharp claws. In just an instant, the two high-level warriors had slashes all over their bodies. What was more frightening was that these vampires did not attack blindly. At the same time, when more than 10 vampires were holding up the two high-level warriors, even more vampires used their speed to rush over. After that, those razor-sharp claws scattered the entire advance party. Almost every member of the advance party was surrounded by more than 10 vampires. It was especially so for those two mages that had weak physically strength. They were surrounded by even more vampires. F***CK, are you guys not embarrassed? Lin Li was almost driven mad. It was as though these vampires had taken stimulants and were risking their lives. A very thick ice wall was erected, yet they charged over without any hesitation. After that, they used their razor-sharp claws to tear open a pathway through the ice wall. Li continued reciting and desperately strengthening the shaky and crumbling ice wall, but under the constraints of the spell's cooldown, the speed of strengthening the wall could not keep up with the vampire's destruction thereof. In mere moments, the thick ice wall was battered. However, Lin Li's situation was not the worst. Reggie, Jonathan, and the rest had it worse. Bandits were not a profession that excelled in direct combat, plus vampires naturally had the speed of spirits. Although they were incomparable to Norfeller, it was more than sufficient when dealing with a few level 15 bandits. In a series of sneak attacks, 3 out of 4 of the bandits had suffered heavy injuries. Only Reggie was left, desperately holding on. Even level 15 bandits were in this plight, so there was no need to mention a level 14 warrior. From the start of the battle, Jonathan could barely hold back a few, but the number of vampires around him grew. This level 14 warrior was soon forced into a corner. Other than them, Attila was not having a great time either. A large group of vampires held him back, and the spells that required recitation could not be cast at all. At this time Attila really thought that he was going to die. Even though he had the power of a level 17 archmage, he could not use it at all. There were too many of these damned vampires. Without the cover of the 2 high-level warriors, Attila could not stop fighting to start reciting. He could only continuously use instantaneously cast low-level spells, and hope that it could delay his opponents till the 2 high-level warriors came back to rescue him. Unfortunately, Attila did not receive the high-level warriors' assistance. Instead, he received an attack to his back by razor-sharp claws. In the moment that Attila had cast a flaming storm, a vampire had already sneaked up to his back. With a tchh, razor-sharp claws pierced through Attila's body. In an instant, there was warm blood spewing everywhere. After that, this vampire pounced over just like a hunting dog that caught its prey, and using the powerful momentum, it pushed Attila to the ground. After that, Attila saw 2 white fangs. It's over. Attila immediately thought as everything in front of him turned black. Boom. But just as those 2 fangs were about to descend, a large fireball had flown over from afar, and landed directly on the vampire that was about to bite him. The power of this fireball was terrifyingly strong. A vampire that was at least level 13 had instantaneously turned into ashes upon impact. Pyroblast. Attila, who had not recovered from his shock, raised his head and saw that young mage wielding a staff and firing large fireballs. 1, 2, 3, 4. 10. Looking at those fireballs roaring past, Attila was completely stunned. The shock that these 10 fireballs gave him far surpassed the shock from those 2 white fangs. As an archmage at the peak of level 17, Attila was very clear what type of spell the pyroblast was. The depletion of mana after 1 pyroblast was comparable to that after 2 level 17 and above spells. Even with his own abilities, he could cast only 5 of them before he had to rest. To release 10 at once, he would require stimulants. But today, there was young mage in his 20s that had fired 10 pyroblasts in his face. Plus it was almost simultaneous. After temporarily escaping from the vampire's entanglement, Attila had enough time to observe that young mage's spellcasting. This time, he clearly saw that that young mage's recitation speed was something that he had never seen before. From the beginning till the end, there was not a single pause. A recitation that should be 10 seconds long had been completely in just 5 seconds, and from the sound of it, there was not a single flaw. It was natural and effortless, and had a bizarre but smooth rhythm. The young mage gripped his magic staff tightly. The complex and mysterious incantations were spilling out of his mouth smoothly as though every word had a mysterious power, and the gigantic fireballs were like the judgment on Doomsday, blasting open a bloody pathway in the encirclement of countless vampires. At this point, Attila even thought that he was dreaming. Mage Attila, are you all right? It was only when this young mage had charged through the encirclement of vampires and reached Attila's side before this archmage that was good at concealment finally regained his senses. I'm fine. Attila's voice suddenly became rather hoarse, and the gaze he fixed on Lin Li started becoming intricate. Seems like we really have to cooperate for once, Lin Li smiled. He looked rather exhausted. While the multicolored potion could stimulate mental strength, it also pushed the body to its limits. However, there was no other choice. Lin Li had no other way out. The 10 pyroblasts had killed 10 vampires, which seemed rather perverted and violent, but looking at the surroundings, one would realize these 10 vampires were just a drop in the bucket. It totally did not dampen the power of this vampire army. Lin Li had no choice but to borrow the power of the multicolored potion if he wanted to escape from so many vampires. I really did not think that Mage Felic's true abilities were so powerful. Adelo looked at Lin Li with an intricate expression. When he discovered that the other party looked rather weak, his mind felt more stable. This archmage that was good at concealing promptly thought that this type of exhaustion was due to those 10 pyroblasts. Unfortunately, Adelo did not know that it was the multicolored potion that worked this way. As the body got weaker, mental strength would get stronger. Mage Adelo, you praise me too much, Lin Li spoke as he raised the magic staff in his hands. He erected a thick ice wall in front of the both of them. Okay, this ice wall should be able to hold off those damned vampires, but it won't be for long. Mage Adelo, we need to think of a solution quickly. How do you want me to cooperate? After hearing this sentence, Lin Li smiled, satisfied. I need you to be honest. If Lin Li had said this at the start, Adelo would have just ignored him. Even though he had known from Harvey that this young mage was not simple, and that his true abilities were at least those of an archmage, what was Adelo's status? He was a legendary realm mage's disciple, and he himself had the abilities of an archmage at the peak of level 17. Why would he hold an average archmage in high regard? From Adelo's perspective, this Felic only had a decent talent at best. He was still far from being truly powerful. However, Adelo did not dare to look at it this way anymore. A mage that could shorten the recitation of the pyroblast to 5 seconds and consecutively cast 10 pyroblasts was definitely worthy of being called powerful no matter which aspect he was viewed from. Furthermore, it was not an average sort of powerful. At least Adelo doubted whether he had the capability to do so. Master Cheyenne was able to, but what was the status of Master Cheyenne? He was a true legendary realm mage that was standing at the peak of the magical domain. Hence, Adelo only hesitated for a moment before he asked in a hoarse voice, "What do you want to know?" "I want to know that cave really exists, don't be in a rush to deny it." Mage Adelo, you and I both know each other's backgrounds. There is no meaning in lying right now. If that cave actually does not exist, I hope that you can tell me earlier so that I can think of another solution sooner. After he said this, Lin Li paused. Of course, if it's real, then it's even better. It would mean the best chance for us to escape from the vampires. It is real. Adelo nodded with certainty. It was as this young mage had said, there was no need to lie at this point anymore. It could be said that everyone was in the same boat, even though there were inevitable conflicts between them, that would have to wait till everyone escaped from the vampire's claws. Very well. When Lin Li heard this, he immediately heaved a sigh in relief. As long as Gloomy Dark was really hidden in that cave, and not in some damned place that was hundreds of meters underground, these damned vampires did not pose much of a problem. After finding Gloomy Dark, Lin Li would have hundreds of ways to make them disappear. Where is that cave? It's further ahead, about 2 kilometers from here. That is the end of the Scar of Death. If we can escape from these vampires, we will be able to find it quickly. Back then, my teacher went in once, and made a map of the terrain of this area. Adelo took out a map from his pocket as he spoke. No wonder, Lin Li opened the map and took a look. His expression immediately had a shred of realization. The map in Amanda's hands was, as expected, incomplete. Once these two maps were compared, the differences were immediately apparent. They both had the terrain of the Scar of Death, but the one in Amanda's hands was far too different. It had simple routes and monster distribution, but had none of the finer details, whereas the one that Adelo took out was completely different. It was especially so for the information about the Scar of Death. From the 3-way crossroad to the Skeletal Warriors, and from the Skeletal Warriors to the entrance of the cave, not a single detail was left out. It even had fine print reminding the map's owner to be careful of certain places and what to take note of in certain areas. It gave a feeling that it was like holding their hands and teaching them how to walk. These vampires were probably the only thing that was left out in the map. Based on the map, the place where these vampires lived should be pretty far away. With the speed of the advance party's movement, it should be almost impossible to encounter them, but something happened in the process, which actually allowed the vampires to discover the advance party's tracks. Thus, it resulted in this battle that was full of danger everywhere and Adalo cooperating with Lin Li. No matter what it was still better to have a map than having none. After Lin Li looked at it, he was not polite with Adalo, either. He just conveniently rolled up the scroll and placed it in his own pocket. After that, he shouted at Norfeller and Edgefalusi, "Hey, you two. Stop slacking, we have work to do." What? Adalo was rather confused. He thought to himself, the battle has already progressed to this stage, who still dares to slack? But after that, Adalo's face had a shocked expression. It was because he clearly saw that those three adventurers that had been in a stalemate with the vampires in a corner suddenly erupted with powerful combat strength. That sort of feeling was like a gentle sheep had suddenly transformed into a man-eating tiger. The pale-faced young man among those three took out 2 daggers, mysteriously. After that, he transformed into an afterimage. The 2 daggers had an impressive radiance, and they instantaneously pierced through 2 level 14 vampires on the left and right. That young man's speed was too fast, he was just like a stroke of black lightning. When those vampires that were like spirits were compared to him, they instantly became slow like snails. Adalo did not even see his movements clearly, and 2 vampires already collapsed below the daggers. Additionally, that mage that had been reserved had started to become different as well. Initially, the magical wave coming from his body was only at the standard of a level 10 magic shooter, but his magical wave started becoming stronger and stronger after the pale-faced youngster unsheathed the daggers. In just an instant, it had broken through to the archmage level. What the hell, another archmage? Adalo's jaw almost hit the floor. He did not imagine that 2 archmages were actually disguised as noobs under his nose. Furthermore, they were in disguise for several days, and he actually did not notice it. Just when Adalo thought that he had enough surprises, that mage's magical waves continued surging. Level 15, level 16, level 17. King Hell, it's actually level 18. At this point, Adalo was pale from fright. This reserved and bony fella was actually a level 18 archmage. How could this be? How could this be? Adalo stood there, dumbfounded, and repeated the same words over and over again. Now, Adalo could not fathom that there was an even greater surprise waiting for him. When Adalo was dumbfounded, a shimmering radiance suddenly erupted amidst the vampires. Oh my god, Adalo felt that everything in front of him was pitch black at that point. Adalo dared to bet on his brains that that sudden eruption of light was definitely the purest divine power that he had ever seen. Even an idiot would know that this type of divine power only belonged to the Brilliance Shrine, only the most loyal and strongest believer could release such a terrifying divine power. Adalo was not an idiot, thus he was very clear that it was at least the strongest bishop, even if not at the archbishop level, to be able to release this type of divine power. At this moment, Adalo had even forgotten about the precarious situation that he was in. He was totally lifeless, and his mind blank. He was totally submerged in this shock that had suddenly arisen. In the face of this powerful strength that had suddenly erupted, the vampires that were unbeatable were now weak and incompetent. In the blink of an eye, the vampires that surrounded the 3 adventurers were wiped out. Most of their deaths were due to that radiance of the female adventurer's holy light. When she wielded the radiance blade and released fire of judgment, not a single vampire could withstand her attacks. At this point, Adalo finally understood why this Felix knew that he had concealed his true abilities, but did not take any action from the start, because there was absolutely no need to. 2 level 17 warriors and a level 17 archmage. This seemingly powerful group was just a joke. There was no need to mention that young mage that could shorten the pyroblast's recitation to 5 seconds, even those 3 companions of his could easily kill Adalo. He would not even have a single chance to retaliate when facing them. Luckily, these vampires appeared at the right time. Thinking about this, Adalo could not help but rejoice silently. If everything was smooth sailing, he should have entered the cave now, and he might have used those 6 magical crystals to temporarily seal that artifact. After that, he would have definitely followed Harvey's plan and tried to kill the other adventurers. What would happen if he were to take action and silence them? Adelo did not dare to imagine it at all. Once 4 peak powerhouses that were at least level 18 were provoked, he would be destroyed even if he had 10 lives. Just when Adelo was silently rejoicing, Norfeller and the rest had already broken out of the vampire's encirclement. Mage Felix, Adelo had originally totally given up, but when he saw these several adventurers were so extraordinarily brave, he started harboring some hope in his heart. At this point, he even felt that with the advance party's current combat power, they would not have a hard time even if they were to clash head-on with these vampires. Actually, we are not hopeless with you and your companion's abilities. No. But it was out of Adelo's expectations that young mage would actually shake his head. We don't have a chance, not a single bit. Why? Asked Adelo. He did not expect that. It's because somebody is coming. Lin Li had a forced smile on his face. Honestly, with the current abilities of the advance party, plus himself who had drunk the multicolored potion, there was at least an 80% chance to exterminate these vampires. In fact, this was all within his calculations after drinking the multicolored potion. Otherwise, who would be so willing to use his body as a joke? Unfortunately, the opportunity had been already missed. In the warlock's eye's field of vision, there were a few red stallions galloping over. The problem was just that there were patches of searing flames on the hooves of these red stallions, crimson eyes, surrounding flames, and a body made from infinite resentment. If this wasn't a shapeshifter, then what was it? Even an idiot in Amril would know that it might not be a prince riding a white horse, but it was definitely a death knight riding a shapeshifter. Only these warriors that had immense strength in their past life while retaining their combat skills could tame a shapeshifter, a terrifying monster that was formed from infinite resentment. Death Knights were the most unique type of undead creatures. Although their bodies and souls had been corrupted by the corrosive dark force, they still retained some things from their lifetime. For example, their combat abilities. Thanks to that, they seemingly had the powers of at least level 15 when they just emerged. Some that were especially strong could even reach level 18 or 20 and above. This was no joke. In the history of Amril, there was some data that recorded the appearance of at least 10 level 20 and above Death Knights. These 10 Death Knights were all famous individuals, and even the worst of them had led their army of knights and raised a city. They were like scythe-wielding Grim Reapers, using blood and darkness to bring disaster to the whole of Amril. Other than being born with immense strength, the Death Knights even had sentience. Dark force had corroded their bodies and souls, but it did not turn them into monsters that only knew destruction and slaughter. They still retained perfect consciousness and thoughts. Although they had been corrupted by the dark force, these thoughts and consciousness had long undergone a complete change. Thoughts and consciousness were not something every undead creature had. Only those that truly stood at the top of the pyramid of undead creatures, such as a high-ranking vampire like Norfeller or a lich like Uchfalusi, would be able to retain sentience under stringent conditions. However, Death Knights already had their own thoughts and consciousness from the day they were brought into the world. Hence, Death Knights were the most unique undead creature. They even overthrew the rules of classes between undead creatures. Unless they were willing, no other undead creature could force them to submit. Even Uchfalusi, this ex-lich, could not summon 2 Death Knights to aid him in the battle at the Sire Town's ruins. The Death Knights were a totally separate entity amongst the undead creatures. They were not restrained or controlled by any force. Only a Death Knight could command a Death Knight, and only those Death Knights that had broken through to level 20 could order their compatriots. They were called Retribution Knights. Luckily, there wasn't a single Retribution Knight in this group of Death Knights. This more or less allowed Lin Li to heave a sigh of relief. What the hell, those are Death Knights. At this point, Adelo's complexion changed. A level 17 Archmage would naturally be able to use a spell like Warlock's Eyes. There was no reason for Adelo to be unable to see whatever Lin Li could see. There was a plume of dust ahead of them. The sounds of hooves were as dense as raindrops. Looking from afar, there were at least 20 Death Knights. They were all powerful existences that were at least level 15. With the addition of a shapeshifter that was similarly level 15, It was a total nightmare to encounter them under any circumstances. Furthermore, there were so many vampires around them. How could Death Knights appear here? Adalo opened his mouth. He was stunned for a minute. Adalo racked his brains, but he still could not understand how those 20 Death Knights appeared. The map did not have any markings related to them, so why would they suddenly come here? Could it be that the map in his hands was inaccurate? How's that possible? Adalo simply could not believe the map in his hands had any mistakes. It had to be known that this map was personally made by Mentor Cheyenne. If there was anyone in this world that dared to say they were well acquainted with the Blackstone Mountains, then that person would undoubtedly be Mentor Cheyenne. In the past tens of years, Mentor Cheyenne would come to the Blackstone Mountains almost every year, and knew every single bit of this place like the fingerprints on his fingers. If the map that Mentor Cheyenne personally made had issues, then wouldn't man be able to give birth? I think this is a coincidence. Lin Li rubbed his nose. He looked rather guilty. Adalo didn't know what was happening, but Lin Li had already made a guess. Be it the vampires or the Death Knights, it mostly had to do with him. There was a conflict that could not be soothed between holy light and gloomy dark. Back at the Well of the Sun, when Lin Li had just obtained the Stars of Fury, the clash between the powers of light and darkness had even triggered an intense explosion. Although holy light was now hidden by him in the Ring of Endless Storm, just a shred of its aura being released would be able to invoke gloomy dark's response. This was actually very normal. You had brought rat poison into somebody's house to kill them, and you still did not allow them to respond? However, once gloomy dark responded, things would get very troublesome. It could not be helped. All of the undead creatures in the Scar of Death were born from the powers of gloomy dark. Once it responded, wouldn't underlings make their way over and kill them? Just watch. Right now, it was just vampires and Death Knights, but if gloomy dark was not taken under control quickly, there might even be liches or humorous wyrms appearing as well. Uchfalusi, I need to prepare a spell for about 2 minutes. Yes, master. The conversation between these two mages made almost everyone confused. It was especially so for Adalo, whose heart was burning with anxiety. When he heard the conversation, he was so angry that he stomped his feet. Youngsters really knew nothing about crises and danger. Usually, they were not like this, so why did they make reckless decisions when it was a critical stage? One should know that this was the best chance to escape. More than half of the vampires had already died, and 20 Death Knights were rushing over. At this point, if they were to run away, they would have some chance of escaping from those damned undead creatures. Adalo had not thought in his wildest dreams that this Felik would actually prepare a spell at such a crucial time, and he even had to prepare it for 2 minutes. F***CK, 2 minutes. Do you think we are on a stroll now? At this point, Adalo really wanted to ask this young mage, 2 minutes, what kind of spell are you preparing? Is it the legendary Judgment Day? Okay, even if you really do know Judgment Day, those are Death Knights in full fury. They wouldn't give you a chance to use it. Could it be that you think you would be able to hold off 20 Death Knights for 2 minutes, just with your mage subordinate? However, Adalo did not say anything in the end. He merely sighed in annoyance. It could not be helped. Even an idiot would know that the right to command the advance party now lay in the hands of this mage. Be it Jonathan, the commander on paper, or Adalo, who was shouldering a secret mission, none of them had the right to disagree. At such times, ability was everything. Lin Li had 3 subordinates that were powerhouses level 18 and above, and his own abilities were fathomless. Who would dare to go against them? Next, Adalo saw that the bony mage walk out from the crowd. He gripped his magic staff tightly, and his recitation came deep and hoarse, just like a form of prayer in the olden days. What spell is this? Adalo was studying under a legendary mage, and he himself was an archmage at the peak of level 17. His research on magic incantations was more advanced than that of an average mage, but at this point, his mind was full of question marks when he heard it. The incantation that this mage was reciting was something that Adalo had never heard of. He could not even decipher what the characters that were used in it meant. However, his confusion only lasted less than 10 seconds. When a black gate suddenly opened, Adalo's face instantly turned pale. Tide of death. At that point, Adalo really thought he was seeing things. How could this be? The legendary level 20 spell, Tide of Death, that even legendary realm powerhouses had no choice but to retreat from, and which could constantly summon undead creatures to serve the caster. How could it have appeared here? Soon, Adalo knew that he was not seeing things. It was because he clearly saw a group of black skeletons walking out of the black gate. They were wielding rusty machetes in their hands, and their bones did not have a single bit of luster. Everything about them was exactly the same as the skeletal warriors on the other side of the cave. There was a thick fog surrounding the black gate, and thick yet powerful death aura was being emitted by it, which made everyone hold their breath. A large number of undead creatures surged out of the black gate like floodwater: skeletal warriors, hell ghouls, liches. Adalo even saw a few bats flying into the sky. It really is the tide of death. Adalo's voice was like he was sleep-talking. In the face of this nightmarish scene, he even lost the ability to think. He could only stare as the black fog pervaded the area, and then watch as the two forces of undead creatures got entangled with each other. Although the battle between undead creatures did not entail blood and flesh spewing everywhere, it was similarly intense. Countless skeletal warriors were like moths rushing towards a light. They charged incessantly, and then continuously got ripped into fragments by the numerous vampires. The hell ghouls waved their bone staff and continuously shot out deathfire bombs. The lich's recitation united, and caused the magical wave in the area to surge like boiling water. The battle between the two forces of undead creatures were like Mars had crashed into Earth. They had just collided with each other, and it had already produced dazzling flares. At this point, almost everyone placed their focus on this intense battle. Almost nobody realized that young mage was placing magical crystals on the ground. Ever since Ujfalusi had been reciting the incantations, Lin Li never lifted his head once. He had been focused on positioning the magical crystals. The expression on Lin Li's face was incomparably focused, and he placed every magical crystal meticulously as though he was afraid the magical crystal would shatter with just a tiny bit of carelessness. The sounds of hooves that were like raindrops drew closer. When Lin Li placed down the 7th crystal, the 20 death knights riding on shapeshifters finally appeared in everyone's field of vision. Looking from afar, they were like thunderclouds that were red and black. The red was from the flames, and the black was from their armor. When the 20 or so shapeshifters simultaneously neighed, almost everyone's heart tightened. Oh my god! Adalo's face was completely pale as he looked at the death knights that were rushing over like a gale. The strength of these death knights surpassed his expectations. At least 10 of them had reached level 17. There were even 2 of them that had the strength at the peak of level 17. This was no longer a level of strength that the advance party could resist. Just those 2 death knights at the peak of level 17 would be able to go against the whole advance party. Furthermore, they had over 20 companions as well as tens of vampires' assistants. What do we do, Brother Reggie? Looking at the power of these death knights with their own eyes, a few bandits could not help but lose their confidence. If they'd known this was going to happen, it would have been better to escape earlier. They would not even care so much if they were to face the skeletal warriors after retreating back into the cave. After all, although the infinite skeletal warriors were horrifying, it was not as bad as 20 death knights. Why don't we make use of the chaos and escape quickly? Wait, Mage Felix will have a solution. At this point, other than Norfeller and Rena, Reggie was the only one that trusted Lin Li. That night in the tent, this monstrous young mage had left too deep of an impression on him. Thus, he still believed in the other party even though they had encountered such a situation. However, even Reggie, who trusted Lin Li the most, did not realize that after the Death Knights had charged into battle, that young mage still leaned forward, meticulously positioning the magical crystals. When the number of magical crystals on the ground reached 13, he finally stood up slowly and wiped the sweat off his forehead. His face actually had an exhausted but satisfied smile. After that, the reciting of a long incantation began. The quietness of the scar of death had been obliterated. The footsteps of skeletal warriors, explosions of the deathfire bomb, neighing of shapeshifters, shrieks of the vampires, and liches reciting incantations. Countless noises had been mixed together, causing the scar of death to be like a bustling city. When 20 Death Knights charged into battle, more than 100 skeletal warriors had been smashed into smithereens. That feeling was like a red-hot knife slicing through butter as the latter had been cut with a sizzle. There were still countless undead creatures continuously surging out of the black gate that was surrounded by fog. Uchfalusi was still reciting incantations, but that abnormally pale face was now as white as a sheet. To forcefully activate a level 20 Tide of Death with the abilities of a level 18 Necromancer even after taking the potions that Lin Li had given him. This type of self-harming casting method still made him be on the verge of having his mana collapsing at any time. Although Uchfalusi temporarily had the ability to cast the Tide of Death with a bottle of arcane magic potion, this was not the genuine legendary realm. The current Uchfalusi was still a level 18 Necromancer, and he was still far from the Lich in the Sire Town's ruins that could summon humorous WYRMS. Just by taking a closer look, one could tell that the undead creatures surging out from the Tide of Death were still far from being as powerful as the ones back at the Sire Town. There were large numbers of skeletal warriors and hell ghouls, but there were actually very few vampires and liches with powerful combat prowess. The full might of 20 or so Death Knights was almost on par with the power of the legendary realm. If it was the complete Tide of Death, it would still be alright. With large numbers of vampires and liches, it could still hold up against these 20 or so Death Knights. But it was a completely different thing now. The Death Knights had just charged into the fog, and the battle became lopsided. Be it skeletal warriors or hell ghouls, they could not defend against the charge of the Death Knights. In just the blink of an eye, the 20 or so Death Knights had already forced their way near the core of the black fog. Uchfalusi was standing at the core of the black fog, using his hoarse and deep recitation to maintain the operation of the Tide of Death. All sorts of undead creatures were still continuously surging out of the black fog, but at this point, Adalo also knew that this necromancer could not hold up any longer. The magical wave on his body was getting weaker and weaker. It was poles apart when compared to the magical wave he had initially. Once the magical wave on Mage's body started to weaken, it also meant that his mana was almost depleted. Mage Felik, your companion is about to fall. Adalo's voice was unusually filled with anxiety, but it seemed like Lin Li did not hear it at all. He continued focusing on reciting the incantation. His expression was calm and focused as though whatever was happening around him had nothing to do with him. At this point, there was only one thought in Lin Li's mind. Faster, faster. Even though Lin Li had drunk the multicolored potion, temporarily gaining the ability to cast spells above his level and an infinite mana, but when casting this level 21 spell, he still felt powerless. This feeling was like an ant carrying an elephant. Every step taken had to be very careful, and with just a single misstep, the elephant would come crashing down, crushing him into a meat sauce. The multicolored potion could indeed allow a person to have the ability to cast spells above his own level, but one could not forget that archmages and legendary mages were in two different realms. Casting a legendary spell with the abilities of an archmage was no different from playing with fire. With just a slight mistake, he would turn into ashes. The current Lin Li was as if walking through a torrential river alone. He had to desperately maintain balance while slowly advancing. A slight misstep while going against the torrential river would result in him being flushed far away by the turbulent waters. Meanwhile, the four bandits quickly lost their combat capability under the violent charge of the Death Knights. They sustained heavy injuries, and were now leaning against the cold hillside. Blood was flowing incessantly from their wounds, and even their breathing was becoming weak. If they didn't receive treatment on time, then even if they did not die, their power level might deteriorate. The two high-level warriors that Adalo had brought along fared not any better. Their bodies were filled with wounds, which were all left behind by the encirclement of vampires just now. The large loss of blood had made their complexions abnormally pale, and every move they made seemed to have lost the agility they had had. Although they were still putting up a fight, Adelo knew that they could not hold out any longer. Adelo scanned everyone, and his mind began to be filled with despair. In the whole advance party, other than himself, there were only 2 people left that still maintained their combat capability, and they were both companions of Mage Felix. Adelo remembered that one was called Norfeller, and the other was Rina. At this time Adelo more or less understood why this Mage Felix had only brought a few people, yet dared to sneak into the Maltha family's party under disguise. Furthermore, he was not afraid that he would face the Maltha family's wrath if he were to be found out. It could not be helped. The fighting ability of these several people was indeed too strong. There was no need to mention Ujfalusi. Even Adelo's mentor, Cheyenne, would have to be serious if he came across a necromancer that could cast Tide of Death. As for the other 2, they were each stronger than the other. That Norfeller was more like a vampire than vampires. His speed made him look like a black lightning, and he was having little difficulty under the encirclement of numerous vampires. The 2 unusual daggers he wielded were like the scythes of a grim reaper. Every time there was a flash of the blade, there would definitely be a vampire shrieking. Adelo counted, there were at least 20 vampires that had fallen to his daggers since the start of the battle. But this was nothing compared to that woman called Rina. When she stood there, wielding her sword with both hands, Adelo could feel a dazzling ray of holy light being emitted. The whole world seemed to be bathed in a holy radiance, and even those death knights that were giving off a cold aura did not dare to look directly at this type of dazzling holy light. She did not attack much. It was only when the death knights had forced their way into the core of the black fog that she used the sword in her hands to protect Ujfalusi, who was maintaining the operating of the Tide of Death. Adelo saw her deflecting the attacks of these 20 or so death knights with his own eyes. Under the dazzling radiance of holy light, Adelo even thought that he was dreaming. If I can come out of this alive, I need to speak to Hutton properly. After witnessing the valiant combat power of this group of people, Adelo had already made up his mind. If he could come out of this alive, he had to try his best to persuade Hutton to hire this group of people at all costs. The fighting prowess of this group was truly terrifying. If they offered their service to the Maltha family, then Maltha family's status in the breezy plains would skyrocket. However, all of that would have to wait till he returned alive. The black fog of the Tide of Death got thinner and thinner. The undead creatures that were surging out also no longer included the silhouettes of vampires and liches. Even the hell ghouls that could release deathfire bombs started becoming fewer and fewer. A level 20 necromagic had now become an average undead summoning spell. Only a group of sparse skeletal warriors were suicidally charging towards the death knights from the black fog with their clumsy and slow footsteps while wielding their rusty machetes. Norfeller and Rina displayed tremendous combat prowess, and Adelo used up all his options including the scroll that his mentor had given him for protection, but the tide of the battle was still inevitably swinging towards the worst. With a resounding recitation, 10 vampires had finally appeared from the black fog. It's over. After seeing the appearance of the long-awaited vampires, Adelo's expression did not have a shred of joy. Instead, it suddenly became pale because Adelo knew that this was the final bit of strength of that necromancer. Adelo was right. Almost in the instant when these 10 vampires charged out of the black fog, Ujfalusi's recitation stopped. It was as though an invisible hand was choking him all of a sudden. The black fog, once so thick it seemed solid, suddenly started becoming thinner and thinner before ending up completely blown away by a gust of cold wind. Those 10 vampires shrieked loudly and charged over in a frenzy, but what was waiting for them was a scarlet fog. This was followed by incessant shrieks. In just an instant, those 10 vampires fell to the withering death that was used jointly by the Death Knights. When the 20 Death Knights raised their swords to move the shapeshifters into formation and charge, only Rina was standing before them, wielding the Radiance Blade. At this time, that beautiful paladin was like a statue, gripping the Radiance Blade tightly. Her snow-white face was painted with persistence and steadfastness. The black armor, red flames, neighing of shapeshifters, and hooves looked magnificent yet solemn under the dazzling radiance of the holy light. It's over, it's all over. Everyone's mind had the same thought simultaneously. Adelo slowly shut his eyes, and Reggie shifted his body with difficulty, trying to stand in front of the three brothers that he grew up with. But it was at this point when the surrounding magical wave suddenly erupted like a tsunami. In an instant, a surge of tempestuous mana blew like a storm, and even the whole scar of death seemed to shake. Even Adalo, who had the ability of the peak of level 17, could not help but show a terrified expression in the face of this mana storm. This was not power a mortal should have. Even his own mentor, Cheyenne, would not be able to go up against this divine-like power. Oh my god, when Adalo opened his eyes again, he saw that young mage was holding a magic staff that had a pale yellow gem socketed in it, walking towards the charging death knights with slow and steadfast steps in midst of this storm-like magical wave. And that magical wave that was shaking the entire world was being emitted by his body. These 20 death knights that were spawned by Gloomy Dark could be said to be the elites of the elites. The weakest of them was level 16, while the strongest already reached level 18. When they rode the shapeshifters in a charge, a black combat energy started to arise. It looked like flowing black steel when observed from afar. And standing in the way of this flowing steel was a young mage wearing a black robe. He naturally had a rather weak figure, but it looked even weaker and smaller in the face of this flowing steel. The distance between both parties got smaller and smaller. The Death Knights had already raised their swords, and there was a white frost circling around their blades. The black combat energy was like a searing flame, the shapeshifters neighed, and the dense sounds of the hooves were seemingly knocking on everyone's hearts. At that moment, time seemed to have been frozen in place. Even the air had a smell that suffocated people pervading it, and everyone's hearts started to tighten. Be it Adalo, Jonathan, Norfeller, or Rena, everyone from the advance party had their gaze set on that weak figure simultaneously. 100 meters became 10 meters in just the blink of an eye. The searing combat energy that pervaded the air looked like a thundercloud that covered the sky. At this point, even that weak figure seemed rather blurry. Everyone could only faintly see that he slowly raised the magic staff in his hands. That bit of pale yellow light looked dim and weak in the black fog, just like an oil lamp that was swaying amidst a storm. The shapeshifter's charging speed was faster than lightning. The black torrent was like an open mouth of a gigantic beast. It was as if that weak figure was going to be swallowed in an instant. It's over. Adalo's gaze was full of despair. There was nothing to be concerned about anymore. This group of Death Knights was too powerful. There was even one among them that had the chance to become a Retribution Knight. When they ordered the shapeshifters to start charging, they were like an invincible existence. It was impossible for an archmage to resist their full force, no matter how powerful he was. Only a legendary mage could defend against them. Indeed, the mysterious aura being emitted from this young mage's whole body was very strong. Adalo even felt that out of all the young mages he had seen before, this Felix would be the strongest other than Hutton. However, he was just an archmage no matter how powerful he was. Such a pity. At this point, Adalo's gaze carried a tinge of sympathy. You were just unlucky. Adalo sighed, and reached into his pocket, grabbing the scroll that he had prepared. But, at this point, there was a sudden gleam of light emerging from the black fog. At the start, that glimmer of light was rather dim, but Adalo very quickly felt that that gleam of light started getting brighter and brighter. In the end, it was as brilliant as a blazing sun in the sky. This is... The expression on Adalo's face immediately froze, and he could not shut his mouth. His eyes were filled with disbelief. This is Eternal Light spell. The legendary level 21 spell, Eternal Light spell. When that glimmer of light started to bloom, Adalo had once thought that it was some powerful magical equipment as well as that it was a spell where both sides perished together. But, Adalo definitely hadn't thought that it actually was a level 21 holy light spell. Once mages broke through level 21, they would enter a mysterious realm. This realm was called Legendary Realm. Every mage that could step into the Legendary Realm was an incomparably strong existence, and their stories became true legends. In Amril, there were many legends about legendary mages being circulated. The most famous ones were undoubtedly those few mages from the Dark Ages that personally struck down the Sky Castle. Juresco, Apophis, Hesselink. All of these names were a shining bright star in the history of Anril. As the disciple of a legendary mage, Adalo was clearer than anyone else what sort of terrifying powers a mage would have once he stepped into the legendary realm. It was a completely different power when compared to an archmage's. Adalo even remembered that band of bandits that was placed at the top 5 in the Breezy Plains 10 years ago. Back then, this band of bandits had quite a few powerhouses level 15 and above. They had warriors and mages amongst them, and their leader was a level 18 demonic archmage, but when they entered into a conflict with the Maltha family, his mentor Cheyenne obliterated this powerful band of bandits in an instant. He only used 10 spells from the beginning to the end, and he killed 10 of the most important core members, including the leader. After that, the whole band instantly collapsed, allowing the Maltha family to complete the trade route with the Dwarf Kingdom. This was the power of a legendary mage. In his youth, Adalo had once yearned for this sort of power. In that period of time, he fervently researched magic, including all of the knowledge that could be researched. This continued till Adalo was 40 years old when Adalo finally gave up on his dream. He had no choice but to admit dishearteningly that he could at most become an archmage at the peak of level 19 after spending his whole lifetime researching magic. As for the legendary realm above that, he would never be able to reach it. Only geniuses like Mentor Cheyenne and Hutton could step into the legendary realm. There was a lot of people called genius mages in Anril, but in Adalo's heart, only Hutton was worthy of that moniker. Adalo could even say that he'd seen his progress with his own eyes. Hutton had come in contact with magic at the age of 8, and he had already reached the realm of level 18 archmage in less than 20 years that have passed since then. Every improvement of his was witnessed by Adalo. Other than being envious, he was also jealous as well. From Adalo's perspective, Hutton was a person born for magic. As long as there was anything related to magic, it would not trouble him at all. No matter how profound the theory of magic was, or how complicated the spell execution was, it would be solved easily once it was in Hutton's hands. Even the mentor that was very strict would have no choice but to give a smile full of praise when facing Hutton. However, today, Adalo had no choice but to add the named Felik to the list of genius mages. Since the advance party had set off, the battles and shocks made Adalo have no choice but to admit that the magic talent of this Felik was on par with Hutton's. Adalo never dreamed that he would be able to witness a level 21 spell. Oh my god, this was a power that even Mentor Cheyenne never had before. However, it was very likely he did not possess such a power in his body. Most likely, he had used some powerful magical equipment or some sort of mysterious ritual so that he could temporarily use such a terrifying spell. It was because a level 21 spell did not require 3 minutes to recite the incantations. But so what? It was a genuine level 21 spell. No matter what sort of methods Lin Li had used, he still executed it. Surely it did not mean that one should criticize the other party because of this in a battle of life and death? Who would say, mate, it's not right to cast the spell this way? You broke the rules. Wasn't this bullshit? Furthermore, Adalo, as the disciple of a legendary mage, was clearer than anyone else what was the difference between legendary realm spells and normal spells. Once spells had reached this level, it was no longer a question of whether there was sufficient mana. Many times, legendary spells relied on the understanding and application of rules. Only with sufficient understanding and application of magic rules could one use those spells that only existed in legends. No matter how powerful a mage was, as long as his understanding and application of magic rules was not profound enough, he would still not be able to use legendary spells or become a genuine legendary realm mage. The opposite was true as well. If a mage's understanding and application of the rules was profound enough, then it was only a matter of time before he became a legendary mage. All he needed was merely sufficient build-up. Once all the conditions were met, the legendary realm would be an unlocked gate. With just a slight push, the mage would be able to enter the world that every mage dreamed of. Without a doubt, Felik was the latter. Irregardless of whether he used some powerful magical equipment or underwent some sort of mysterious ritual, the incantations were recited by his mouth, and the elemental structure was sequenced by his mental strength. This also meant that his understanding and application of rules had already reached the legendary realm standard. Becoming a legendary mage was just a matter of time for him. Furthermore, he was younger than Hutton. He was just 20 years old. Maybe within a few years, there would be another legendary mage appearing in the breezy plains. A legendary mage that was shockingly young. Just when their countless thoughts revolving around Adalo's mind, that black fog had been dispelled by the light. The whole world had suddenly become clean, and even the sky seemed to be brighter. The undead creatures summoned by the tide of death and remaining tens of vampires had evaporated in the midst of the eternal light just like snow under the sun. However, those 20 death knights were fine. All of that instantly caused Adalo to have a rather shocked expression. Even liches could not defend against the level 21 eternal light spell, so how could it fail to exterminate 20 death knights? This time, it was not just Adalo. Even Norfeller, Uchfalusi, Rena, and the rest were stunned. Could it be that these 20 death knights were so strong that such a powerful magical power could not kill them? This strange sight made everyone's heart tightened after they became relaxed. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.